All right.
All right, Matt,
Mm,
take it
Am
away.
I sharing my, oh, here we go.
No, you're
Sharing,
not.
sharing. Am I sharing now?
Yes. All good.
And I'll keep an eye on the chat maybe. All right. So one of the things that I love about giving talks at meetups is hopefully it can be more conversational. So I definitely I have slides and there is a presentation and we'll definitely talk through things, but I'd super just be like enjoying people to ask questions or troll me or anything. And yes. So one of the opening stories that I love to tell about this is I actually ran a poll on Twitter, well, whatever it's called now, X, Twix, what are we calling it? Whatever that used to be, and LinkedIn. And it was like dumpster fire versus shitter fire. And I probably got about 80 something responses, and only one of them was for dumpsters. And I've gotten so many interesting comments about the picture of a bunch of porta potties being on fire. My favorite one is people say, like, is that a metaphor for all the silos in our organization? And another one that came up was, well, hey, this is actually, we have questions about the shitter fire because we wonder, are there people trapped inside there? You don't tend to worry about that with dumpsters as much. So I don't know, just a fun fact. So yeah, all right. So I guess what I'd like to start with is actually a question for you guys. What do you think a transformation is?
Not this.
Painful.
Painful.
Physically.
Physically, mentally, emotionally, financially.
I mean, many of us are consultants, so hopefully financially.
Yeah. I've tried to drift from consultant to insultant over the years. Well, so let me ask it a different way. So maybe like all transformation is change, but is all change transformation? When does a change become a transformation?
I feel like there's a scale aspect to transformation. Like it has to be a certain amount of change for it to be a transformation. Like the end result has to be obviously different than the starting point.
Yeah, there's a perceived level of control going from one state to another. That's a transformation. But change is like, oh my God, it just happened.
Huh. So there's like an intentionality behind it.
Yes.
Yeah. I can change my mind, but that does not necessarily mean that I've transformed.
It's a good They Might Be Giants song about that. Cool. All right. So to suspend disbelief, I will just this is my kind of thing. So kind of yes, so scale seems to be a big part of it. Like but even this, like a radical, so maybe that is somewhat of the intentional. And I think it's when I think about a transformation, I think of it as something as how the whole business operates. I've gotten pushback on that, and so like one person said, well, what if all of our teams started doing Scrum? I mean, love it or hate it, I don't kind of give a shit, but would that be a transformation? Like your teams are doing whatever and now they're doing Scrum, or your whole technology department has adopted SAFe or some bullshit. Like, is that a transformation if it's just your technology department? I don't know. I mean, I guess could be, depending on where you're sitting at. All right, so next question. When would you need to transform? Whenever the consultancy starts running low on cash.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like the more realistic answer. I feel like what you would hope
doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or maybe you're stuck in a better, like a happier version of that would be you're stuck in a local maxima and don't know how to get out.
Okay. I think my problem is actually the word transformation.
Yeah, that's why we started with what even is it? Because
yeah,
it's like, can you point to it when it's happening?
Because in my reaction to the caterpillar butterfly is it implies a singular start point and a singular end point, and I have an issue with that.
Dick rider.
What?
Hey, that's my first.
That has not happened to us in quite a while. I'm sorry about that, Matt.
Oh no, that's my first one. I feel privileged.
Oh, there's some doozies that have happened. There's some really good ones there.
We had one meetup where it just was like bomb after bomb, and it was kind of brutal. But
That was the first week of COVID for me, like 5 of them.
I mean, I think he was saying dick biter, which might be when you need to transform.
I think Ryan.
I mean, maybe it was an answer to the question.
I thought it was just exuberance over what you were presenting.
That's well, I think you guys all kind of hit on something similar, but I think it's like when your organization design, whatever that means, doesn't meet whatever you need to do,
Goals,
the anticipated business needs. So clearly this is a larger, like in my mind, all of these words are bigger things, applying them to the business as a whole, or your business needs as a whole, or your organization design as a whole. I don't know. I mean, I could see it happening within maybe subunits, business units, maybe departments. It feels weird.
We knock them off.
Did you post this like on the children'smeetup.com?
That's fun for me.
Nick, if you give me admin, I can start booting people.
And there's a good idea if you have the control to lock the meeting.
Alrighty.
Somebody must have posted the link.
Only in Philly, guys.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
true. I've never done it. Alrighty. Anyways, so this is something that I love because it really happened. Although when I asked the person if they could be named, they said no. But this is my favorite definition of a transformation. It just transforms revenue into expense.
That's awesome.
Ouch.
So in fairness, this particular executive, I'd asked them how many transformations they'd been a part of in like the last few years, and their answer was 7. So yeah, like, and actually I think he said 3, like 3 were simultaneous. Like it was a DevOps, product, and agile transformation all going on at the same time in the same company. So I don't even know what that means, but like that's a lot. Yeah, so fun times. Anyways, all right. So why do transformations fail? So there's a lot of reasons transformations fail. And actually I think my original super snarky talk had 5 or 7 reasons. But I kind of weaned them down to these 3 because I think that actually some of the other ones were maybe manifestations of these anyways. But I don't know. I guess I'd also like to see if there's anything that you believe is kind of some of the reasons that maybe aren't covered very generally by one of these 3 reasons. I'd kind of be curious what y'all have seen with regards to the failure modes.
They're siloed to one function.
Silo tool, yeah. So it's just procurement is transforming. Just kidding. Procurement never transforms.
Yeah, there's that aspect of regional transformation does not mean global transformation, and it also means that regional sub-optimizes almost everything else it talks to.
Here's an interesting thought that I just had. Well, it might be. The conditions that leads one to think, I know, we need to transform. Those conditions might be such that it's kind of like if you couldn't figure it out by now, you probably ain't gonna be, like, in other words, what if you're already screwed because your organization is so screwed up that people, even though they knew the right things to do or things are suck, they still did them anyway. So why do you think suddenly, because you say we're going to transform, that entire culture that has you at this state is going to suddenly transform? I don't know, just
It's like I used to say digital transformation was code for people going, oh shit, computers are important. like we didn't know that. And it's like, fuck, we gotta make them important now for us. All right, well, let's see what happens. Then we can keep talking about these. All right, so leadership
I
involvement.
think
So
that maybe
yeah.
the last thought, they're not outcome focused.
Yeah, like, well, or yeah.
Like
I mean, I would
we're
probably
gonna do
say,
this thing, right? Like you had like leadership's not involved, so you've got like leadership saying like, you guys go transform. So that's
yeah,
like the first problem. And then it's like, yeah, you're just gonna like do agility or some other type of transformation, but
yeah.
who cares why? Just do it.
It's like it's like a transformation as air cover. Like shit, my board is asking me why aren't we agile? And I don't
Yeah,
know
like we
that we
still have people
are or
that
not.
read Embracing
So
Agile in Harvard Business Review, and they're still like quoting that as the reason why they should do it, right? That was like 15 years ago.
yeah, yeah, when the transformation becomes the reason for itself. We have to be agile. Why? Because agile. But what are you trying to solve? Agile. Like, say a different word. Product. All right.
Matt, let me ask you, when you say people-centered, right? Like put that into context. Is that focusing on the people, or is
Yeah.
it getting the people involved, or both,
Yes.
or something else?
We got a whole section on that. So yeah, we'll go through that. And if you still have questions, let's dive into it. All right. So leadership involvement. So I think especially the bigger the company, the more important this is. And we'll talk about why it probably still won't work. But foundationally, all transformations are leadership transformations. And I know, leadership, management, we can lead at all levels. Anybody can be a leader. That's true. And I guess what I mean here is how in large corporations, especially, we conflate the word leadership with positional authority. So the reality is when we have centralized power systems like corporations, we are going to tend to watch the people with authority to see what's safe or how should we act or what's really expected or what are they doing, like are they actually participating, or is it like Kim said, it's like, oh, they're telling me or asking me to change, but they're not really changing what they do up there, whoever those people are. And then kind of last but not least, I think that in order to kind of overcome that, in some way, leaders need to start showing up differently. Whoever those positional leaders, authority figures are, they need to think about how they're going to model the right behaviors and reshape their interactions. I mean, it could be a lot of things, like leading with questions. It could be asking different questions. It could be what's it called? Like when you lower the fidelity of the information you're trying to get, all the allowing failure type stuff. But anyways, I think one of the biggest things that I see missing in most transformations is that problem of like, we want the teams to do this new thing, or we want these departments to start interacting in this new way, but nothing really changes in like whatever the leadership meetings we have. However, the leaders themselves are still incentivizing their subordinates or their operational teams or things like that. And this is how I feel a lot of them might actually feel. So one of the things that I think is a challenge related to leadership, and I've started using this terminology a lot: thin change can still be big change. Because I feel like what I hear is a lot of people just say, well, yeah, change can be big and change can be risky, so let's make small experiments that are safe to fail and that'll de-risk it. And that is true, but it really kind of depends on what type of, if you think about trying to get a VP level buy-in for getting a team to try new ways of working, that's a fine experiment and that's going to shrink the risk. But to be honest, there wasn't ever a lot of risk for that VP to trial that with that team anyways, because to be jaded, it would be very easy if that experiment went bad for that VP to say it was those fuckers over there that just didn't do it right. Or to be honest, even if it went amazingly well, he gets to take credit or she gets to take credit, and it doesn't actually change that person's job. If it goes well, they're just going to say, yes, awesome, scale it, spread it around, right? But it doesn't really change what they have to do. So when I say thin change can still be big change, when we start thinking about other organizational experiments, like who's ever tried to do product or project to product funding changes? Like changing the operating model of how work gets funded, starting with strategic portfolio and allocation. A big change would be, let's change how this entire Fortune 1000 company does budgeting for everything all at once. And we would say that's big and that's risky and we probably shouldn't do that. So let's make a small experiment. Let's find maybe a value stream or a platform and let's just change. But so we're going to thin that change down. We're going to do all the good things that we know to do about designing an experiment and making it small and trying to suck some of the risk out of it. But all we're really taking the risk out is we're taking the risk out of the organizational ripple effects. If that experiment goes well, there's still large implications for how we're doing strategic allocation of money at the company. That's changing the nature of how the office of the CFO thinks. It changes a couple of controllers' jobs. If we've got, especially like a project-oriented funding approach, there's probably something like an executive staffed or supported investment review board. And those people's jobs in that function is no longer needed. So we've designed a nice small experiment to figure out how to change funding. But the implications of that experiment going well are still big because we're bringing it nearer to the people with power and potentially changing their lives and jobs. So I want to pause there because that's kind of I think it's kind of a big one. And I've actually gotten some pretty big arguments on this one. So I'm kind of curious what y'all think about this one. Yeah, John.
Just on your last point about getting close to the power, there's like when you talk about organizational networks and the core and the periphery, a lot of times, yeah, you can do a lot of cool things on the core. You can really, innovate and do some stuff, but sometimes, the closer you get to that power structure or into the core, yeah, it can be more dangerous, so to speak, depending on the culture that's there.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of part of what this point is whatever the change is, it's not going to go beyond whatever the cultural norms are that senior leaders aren't willing to touch, that they're not willing to change or reshape themselves. And I think that's not good or bad. That's just sort of like, it's like when you're building an area, you can develop an area, but there's streams and forests and, there's just stuff you're going to have to work around at some point. But I think one thing that can help us, especially as change agents, we can go in and sort of paint this picture of like, well, here are some of the major boundaries. Here are some power structures. You're saying you want to change and you're saying you want to change that looks like this. That's awesome. That means you would need to change this, this, and this. And if they go, no, I don't want to change that, or nah, we'll do that in phase 2. And that's awesome. Phase 2 is great. But that means whatever you're asking for is going to be this sized instead. Is that really, and that size thing is going to produce these outcomes instead of these other outcomes. Is that acceptable? Right. And so we can actually start using these concepts, not necessarily to just completely shit all over transformations, which is fun. And I do love doing it. But actually to help people realize what they're asking for and what it's going to actually take to get them there, and then kind of connect those dots for them. So, all right. And then I think maybe this is pretty obvious to all of us, but I think we hear a lot about like, we want change leaders and we want innovation people and change executives, but the status quo is what is incentivized. And the reality is, if you're an executive and you take a big risk and it goes really well, you made a bet and it pays off amazingly. An amazing payoff for an executive is what, like a largish bonus that year? You're already making probably plenty of money as an executive, especially at a larger company. You're probably not going to get a promotion. You could, if you're more of a junior executive, maybe you get, but like if you're the CEO, you're not getting a promotion. If you're a C anything, you're probably not getting a promotion to a different C job. If you're a V, even if you're a V, what's the likelihood that you're going to go from V to C because of a risk that you took that went well? Like, that doesn't normally happen. One of those people has to die or move on or choose more, spend more time with the family. So the reality is the upside of something going well is pretty minimal or pretty short term. Now, if you're that same V or C level person and you take what looks like a risk and it goes badly, what's the downside for you? Right? You start getting encouraged to succeed elsewhere. The board wants you to spend more time with the family, like all these things that we hear. So, and not only that, it's not just possibly the loss of your job, and you think that's fine. This person was making $14 million a year anyways. But it becomes, it's loss of status. It might be potentially, having to wait a while to get your next thing. And it's not always about, I don't think it's always about the money when you're at this kind of level. So there's a lot more at risk if what happens goes poorly, and there's not much upside. So we're basically just saying, especially the larger and larger the organization is, the more, especially when we have central power or few people with power at the top, we're actually creating systems that incentivize staying to the middle and staying to the status quo. Fun times. So I don't want to go into a ton of this. Actually, I have a whole other talk about this, but has anybody read the book Obliquity? I don't know why I asked general questions like that in a virtual room, but it's a good book. You should definitely read it. It's a bit of an old book. The TLDR in the book is, hey, the best way for businesses to achieve their outcomes, try to go about them using indirect methods. If you want more money, focus on your customer, focus on your employees, stuff like that. So oblique leadership is a model. So if most businesses are not embracing obliquity or not oblique businesses, and that means they probably need to change to start thinking about that. And as we just kind of covered, one of the things that we need to do to change organizations is start with leaders first. So I started asking myself, like, what would be oblique practices for leadership? What are some oblique skills that leaders might do to, help with this idea of indirect methods of accomplishing things? So that's kind of this model. You can go to obliqueleadership.org. I think everything out there is pretty up to date, and everything licensed Creative Commons. So it kind of has these three main pillars, like develop people, design the environment, and decide effectively. And then there's kind of some subcomponents in there. And then each of these, like, again, you can go out to the website and read the details behind each of these things. But the the kind of base of being people oriented, like focusing a little bit on self and how you show up. And then, of course, helping others, because that's just sort of leadership in general. But I think the crux, the core of oblique leadership is about this environment design and experience design, because we want to be more of, I think I love the, like, I've seen this a lot more recently, these ecological metaphors for leadership and systems. Like, you can't make the tomato plant give you tomatoes. Like, don't shout at the plants. So you plan your garden, you tend the garden, you weed the garden, you water if there's no rain. So you help design the environment, trying to increase the likelihood that the results you want will emerge from the situations that you've created. And so I think that's what we want to be doing. I think oblique leadership, or these ideas in general, are indirectly about shaping the environment and increasing likelihoods of emergence. So that's kind of what this is, the TLDR. So I'm happy to answer more questions about it, and it's out there in the world. So here's more of the detail, and I think this is all out on the website. All right, so people-centered. So who was I can't remember who asked the people-centered question earlier. Just type your name in the chat.
He actually might have dropped. I think it was
maybe
Robert Legati.
Oh, poor guy. Oh.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully he comes back with the singing guy. All right. So people-centered, I think it's not just be nice and kind, like, yes, also maybe don't be an asshole is cool, but I think it's more about, we know a lot about, like, kind of the psychology of change. And when I think what people-centered means, it's making sure that we're being thoughtful about how humans work. And that can come across a little bit mechanical, like if we're just like, whatever, chemically fueled pattern matching machines, whatever. But there's a way that we work socially and psychologically, and there's kind of things that we should do and things that we shouldn't do. And so, like, things like, hey, if we want people to change, well, it's really hard for people to change if they don't actually know. I mean, we kind of talked about it, like, be agile. What the fuck does that mean? I don't know, but do it because it says it in CIO.com. So please do it. So what's expected of people? Are you actually able to do whatever? So now we know, like, yes, it means do these specific skills or do these methods or practices. Awesome. But I can't. I don't have the tools. I don't have the skills. I need training. So you have to make sure that we can actually accomplish the things that we're doing. It's like, what's anybody remember Penny Arcade from, like, back in the day? And he's like, how do you do this? And he's like, drown less, swim more. So make sure you can actually do what's being asked. And then I think one of the biggest things is, people don't want to be imposed on, right? People want to be invited. So I think Esther Derby in her new book calls this the fingerprints principle. And I really like that that metaphor. Like people want to see that their fingerprints were on it somehow. And that doesn't mean that everybody gets what they want. And it doesn't mean that everything that was maybe if any feedback that was given was explicitly acted on, but you got to see how your input helped shape whatever it is that is happening. Even if you give some feedback and we decide to not do something about it, you know, addressing that and helping say, hey, yes, we heard you. We're going to go this other direction, and here's the rationale why. So to try to keep feeling less controlled, I think we want to make sure that we're doing things like over communicating during the change. So one of my, I think it was Jason Little has a book about lean change. It's been around for a while now, but he has this great story in there about how basically he just ran lean coffee after lean coffee after lean coffee in all these different areas and departments. And this was in the before times when people were getting together in all the dimensions. But I think that it doesn't have to be overly complicated, but it does have to feel authentic, and people have to feel like they have access, and they have to feel like whatever's being shared with them is actually happening and meaningful, right? So does that mean communication could be supported by things like a corporate blog or some videos on a change channel that people like? Sure, those aren't horrible things, but I think if people are just getting told without having any interaction with that, there's also kind of a thinness to those communications can happen. I think too, we need to make sure that like our feedback systems have been thought through. So if people are doing whatever we're asking them, how do we let them know that they're doing it right or not, right? Like that's fine too, as long as we're not berating people. But how do we give people, and it's not just encouragement. Like encouragement is nice too, but again, from just the change psychology perspective, aside from just being nice, it's actually it's reinforcing, like, hey, you did the thing, awesome, that's exactly the thing you're supposed to be doing. Can we make sure you just keep doing the thing that you're supposed to do? That's great. And then kind of last but not least, like I think I saw Dale Emery give a keynote on this way back in the day called Resistance as a Resource, and it might have been recorded. It was one of the TechWell conferences, but I really like this idea of resistance as a resource, because we all say things like humans don't like change, humans resist change. And I actually think that's bullshit. And you can kind of prove this to yourself, because would you take a change that is obviously beneficial to you, like more money or something that you really want? So generally, it's not that we're change fearful, we're avoiding loss. And there's all sorts of things that we could be afraid of losing. We could be afraid of losing status, power, control, joy. Like, and there's other models. I think one of the most popular ones is, I think it's called like SCARF or SNARF or BARF or something like that. But this idea that like there's things that we are afraid of losing. And I think in Thinking Fast and Slow, the Daniel Kahneman and Amos T something, they talk a little bit about loss aversion, and that we also tend to weigh loss aversion 2-to-1 against gains. So even if you see an upside, if there's something that you're afraid of, you're going to weigh that more heavily than a possible upside that you see. So we don't naturally resist change. We naturally avoid loss. And kind of coming back to things like the over communicate, anything that is uncertain or unclear or ambiguous is just amplifying that. And the way that amplification works is it probably just takes whatever that fear of loss is, and it just makes it bigger. So it's already being weighed 2 times more than an upside. And then ambiguity or uncertainty is just making whatever that is feel bigger than that yet again. So we can leverage this. And Dale's whole thing was resistance as a resource. Instead of just going, oh, so-and-so is a change resistor, or those people over there resisting what we're trying to do, try to figure out what it is that they're afraid of losing, and then find a way, and this could almost be considered an oblique method as well. What can you add to the change, or what can you take away from the system, or how can you manage the change in such a way that we're now addressing the loss avoidance instead of just labeling people resistors? And that doesn't really help us anyways. Any thoughts on people first stuff?
So probably about 10 years ago, I had an argument with my then boss because he told me I was an engineer, even though I've never written code beyond HTML. And I resisted being called an engineer. And he said, and I ran DevOps in the Agile practice at that time. And he said, you're a human systems engineer. And so I think ever since that point, this kind of resonated more with me, that you know,
Yeah.
and it makes it feel cold, like you were saying before, like I'm like moving people around on a chessboard or something. And obviously that's not what we're doing, or not what we're trying to do when we work in transformation, at least. I'm sure it feels like that sometimes to the people that we're transforming. The over communication part, I think, gets misconstrued in a lot of ways, right? Because especially as agilists, when we talk about transparency and things like that, people can take it to mean, well, that means everybody tells me everything all the time. No, that's not what transparency means. And so the communication's got to come from a perspective of why it's important to them, what's in it for, like all of those things. Just like when we build software products and we try to understand what our customers want, we have to do the same thing here.
Yeah, understanding the purpose, the reason, messaging is important, tone is important, the right kind of access is important. It's great to be very transparent about lots of kinds of information, but does all of that need to be push oriented, or can some of that be pull oriented? And then what's the right blend of those things? Awesome.
One of the phrases that a colleague and I we've been using more this year, it's like an interaction first approach.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, what's the first bullet of the manifesto? Individuals and interactions over. But, you know, it sounds stupidly simple, but, you know, it's shocking how little true collaboration, because working in a silo, handing off documents, I call that cooperating. Other people might say, well, we're collaborating. And it ain't collaboration. That's just, you know, you're not actually interacting and talking, and plus you interact with the environment, to your earlier points. You know, there's more than just people, you know, but to me, that's important.
Well, there's lots of pieces in that environment. We'll actually talk about that probably next, but there's lots of models, and I'm by no means trying to say these are the right ones or the best ones even, but these are the ones that made the most sense to me. So again, you kind of notice there's a three-part stuff. So people-centered, have we gotten people aligned? Have we activated people? And then are we helping people adjust? And kind of samesies, each of these have, it's kind of linear because like it has to be linear when you present it. The reality is all these things are kind of happening simultaneously and we should be considering them. But the alignment stuff, you'll see, like when I'm thinking through people-centered change, I like to kind of go from this top step down when I'm planning whatever the change might be. Like, you know, have I aligned people? Great. Then how will I activate them? And then once it's so, but the reverse is true. Once the change has started and I'm like evaluating how it's going, I usually kind of like to start from adjust and move backwards to align. And then each of these have some subcomponents, which, you know, you can read the website as well as I can, but you can probably just skimming these words, get where we're coming from, like clarity, like, do you know why we're doing what we're doing? Capability, are you able to? Like invitation, have we been activated because have you been asked to come in and solve the problem? Do you have a feeling of choice, or do you feel like you have to do what's being told? And involvement is a little bit more like you feel actually responsible. There's this cool study I was reading recently about people in nursing homes that were given a plant and they were told just water the plants once a day or whatever. And those people's health and mental health and physical health all got a little bit better than their peers in a control group, just because they had a thing that they felt responsible for doing, which I thought was interesting. So maybe all we need to do is like hang up copies of the manifesto next to a plant and ask people to water it and it'd be fine, right? But yeah, so like and again, feedback isn't like feedback, like how do we know what our customer's doing? This is more like, you know, you probably all have read or heard of those studies where like the hospitals are trying to get like doctors to wash their hands. And so they put the little, did you wash your hand buttons like right next to the door where they're supposed to like scrub into surgery. So like, are we giving people that right feedback? And is the feedback like, is it timely? Does it make sense for what they're doing? And is it specific to the actions that we're trying to encourage? So that's kind of what this model is all about. So again, you can go read more about it on your own time. And last but not least, consider the organization as a system. So I love systems and ecology, and I have a horse farm and I do permaculture oriented homesteading-y things. And yeah, anyway, so I just love systems. And I think unfortunately, organization design too often is just like it's basically the fancy word for what like an executives just want to do a restructure. And unfortunately, like that there's a lot more to organization design than just the structure of a company. And organization design as a topic, as an academic topic, as a research topic, has been around since at least the 40s, when a gentleman whose last name is Trist, and I can't remember his first name at the moment, started figuring out like how to do socioeconomic, or not socioeconomic, sorry, socio-technological organization design. And technical back then, he was talking about different ways of like hooking up carts in coal mines in the UK. So there's kind of two different camps of org design. There's like the strategy-based one and the social-based one. There's kind of the US with strategy, and that was kind of like Jay Galbraith and his folks and his followers. And then the socio-tech folks kind of started going in the UK. If you all have read Team Topologies, I kind of have a love-hate relationship with Team Topologies. It's a great book. I actually agree with a lot of the stuff that's in the book. I feel sad that it was written from just kind of the blinders on perspective of like kind of DevOpsy patterns and kind of tech departments only, when a lot of the things they're actually touching on in that book applies to whole systems as a whole. And also it's incomplete. And I know that we have a tendency to like read that one book and now we are like experts on systems thinking or org design. And it's like there's a whole boon of other things. So read at least 3 more books, or at least 2 more books after Team Topology about org design to just round yourself out. So all right, so I love this because I do feel like sometimes transformation is the golden hammer and it's just bashing in all these nails. So I love this picture. But yes, and what opaque change means will be pretty clear in a second, but you need more than just the opaque changes. We need to change more than just tactical level output. So when you're changing a whole system, the whole system has to be in balance. And very often, like getting all of our teams to do Scrum, or even just teaching all of our coders how to test first, like that's all fine. Like those are things that can happen, but all of those things attach to other things in the system. And if a change is harder to make, it's usually because whatever we're changing is attached to other things that are somehow causing friction on that thing. And that's something that I think is important. And that's why I think a lot of changes fail, because they only focus on the stuff that was easy. And we kind of talked about that earlier. Like it's very easy to go, have a bunch of teams change their ways of working, or at least it's more easy than it is then start changing, like how do we do strategy deployment, or how do we do budgeting allocation? Like those are bigger systemic things. And then last but not least, because systems are more about the emergent properties that happen when we connect things together, it's really important to focus on the connection. Like and I don't believe you can understand a system without deconstructing it and understanding what its parts are, because a system is parts that are connected. So I'm not exactly like everything has to be integrative. Like you have to do both, right? So we have to deconstruct to understand what the parts are, but then we have to reconstruct it to understand how the parts are connected. And usually the bigger changes or the more interesting changes happen, or problems with the changes happen, when we focus on how the parts are connected instead of just the parts themselves. And too often we focus on the parts and not the connections in systems with regards to social change in general, and specifically organizational change and organization design. So I feel like this is how probably a lot of transformation feels. It's kind of why, I'm very sorry that this actually happened, because this was a real picture of real people probably getting killed and their homes destroyed. But I think it viscerally makes us associate with lots of transformation. So understand the forces at play. So that's kind of the connections thing restated, but understanding what those are in your organization, I think, is really important. There's always going to be ripple effects, and that's not always bad. It's just that that's the nature of complex systems. It's the nature of human systems. It's the nature of ecological systems. You will do a thing and it will for sure have unintended consequences. That's not necessarily bad. They may not even be significant, but there will be things that you didn't plan for, and more importantly, couldn't have possibly planned for. So that's why we try to make things small and do little experiments. But doing little experiments is, it's good that we design an experiment. It's good that we have a specific learning outcome for the experiment. It's also good to create up some type of a sensing mechanism around the experiment, because we do know that in complex systems, ripple effects will happen. So while we can say, yes, the experiment was successful, or it did validate or invalidate our hypothesis, that's great. But what else did it do? Especially what else did it do that maybe we were not expecting, or we weren't particularly looking for? And that's why we kind of want to do like wisdom of the crowds and keep a nice wide sensor array and do that kind of stuff. And then last but not least, well, if we do experiments and we pay attention and we do all this, it doesn't do any freaking good if we don't actually take what we learned and build it back in. I'm sure we've all seen cases where it's like, awesome, the team was successful, that practice is successful, this change was great, the experiment was wonderful. And now what? I don't know, we ran out of budget. And by the way, our quarterly OKRs are coming up, so I guess we'll get to it in phase 2. Mythical phase 2 that never happens. So just to kind of keep on the theme, there's another model, same webpage, theqforces.org. There's the people first model, which we just went through, and this is the systems first model. So there's a lot in this model visually, and it's my favorite model to think through organizations as systems. So we'll kind of break it down. So the first thing that I said we would explain is opaque. So opaque are things like the obvious forces, the things that are easier to measure, they're easier to see, they're easier to sense. And then the obscure forces are exactly that. They're the obscure things. They're softer things. There might be intuitive things. They might be things that just are just less easier to see and less easier to measure in general. So that's kind of, you'll notice the model is split kind of left side, right side based on that. When we talk about understanding the forces in general, there's these aligning forces and uniting forces, very similar because they're both centering forces. And centering kind of means like they're kind of helping us understand things like direction and why we're here and purpose and stuff like that. I think one of the most important things to know about centering forces, both of them, is they're weak forces. They're important, but weak. When we think about what an aligning force is, like strategic direction, or a uniting force is like our shared values and goals, those are very important because without those things, we're not going to be able to make other trade-offs in this system. So you have to have them. They're necessary, but not sufficient, because how many times have we seen the strategy deck that didn't fucking matter, or the values posters on the wall that didn't mean shit, right? So, I mean, those jokes are so common and bad and old. Like, I mean, whole websites have been dedicated to, like, this. You guys have all seen Despair. Is it despair.org, Despair Inc., Despair? Anyways, great posters, definitely get some. But so anyway, so very important. That's why they're in the top, but also very weak. So we need them, but they won't actually help us move very much. Defining forces. So I like to think, so these are the strongest forces in the system, generally speaking. Shaping, they're opaque. Those are things you see. So those are things like structure or policies or things like that. I like to think of shaping as it's sort of a limiting force or a constraining force. It's like your skeleton. Like, I can't hold 5 beers because I only have 2 arms. So it's the way I'm shaped. So there's only certain things I'll be able to do because of shaping. And that's what kind of the shaping forces mean. It's going to kind of define what's possible for the organization. Then the acting forces are like the more behavioral things, which is why they're obscure. They're harder to see. They're things like your cultural norms, like they're what's incentivized. It's how we reward people. So like the acting forces are kind of define what we will do. So I will go to Oktoberfest and I will try to hold 5 beers because that's what's important to me and how I'm incentivized. So those two things go together. One thing that's important, now that I've kind of brought up some weak forces and some strong forces, is there's some interesting relationships as we start thinking about strength of force. If we need to change something on the shaping side, we either need another shaping force or something from the acting force to come over and again, talking about the connection to make that change. If we try to change something up in uniting or aligning that's connected to a shaping force, it probably won't help very much. In fact, it'll probably frustrate the shit out of us because we're like, hey, look, that structure over there is not aligned with our strategy. And we're going to make some reference about eating something for breakfast and nothing's going to change, right? Last but not least are kind of the moderate forces. So these are called amplifying forces. And the reason they're called amplifying is because they won't necessarily define what the organization can do, but they will make it easier or harder. So by the same token, they're amplifying forces when they're in alignment. They would be dampening forces if they're in disalignment or creating friction. I want to be clear, they probably aren't enough to enact change by themselves. Like if you don't have whatever change you want aligned with shaping and acting, your change will still probably die. So you can't just change your way systemically with amplifying forces only. That being said, you can kill change with amplifying forces by not having them in alignment, because if they create so much friction and so much dampening force, basically the reality is if you make a change take long enough, the organization's going to lose interest, people's minds are going to get tired, the budget's going to run out, like whatever's going to happen, you can dampen a change to death with the amplifying forces. All right, so that's kind of what these things mean. You kind of think through this by saying, hey, there's an element. So element's kind of a weird term, but an element is anything. It's almost any noun in your organization, a practice, process, a policy, a procedure. All the words that begin with P in your organization are definitely elements, along with things like structures, artifacts, or capabilities. So you'll notice that there are then kind of what have been identified as core elements in each of these forces. So the reason these are called core elements is because in larger corporations, these elements tend to be what I think of as the usual suspects. And that is less cool now that Kevin Spacey's a little bit rapey, but it's still very important movie for the rest of us. So it can be useful to show your team, like explain the model without the core elements like I just did, and talk about the forces and how they are, and actually work with your change team or your leadership or whoever is going and try to have them brainstorm. You can give them this definition of element too, like, you know, processes, policies, whatever, and have them brainstorm. What do they think are the significant elements in each of these forces that are working for or against or both, whatever change you're trying to make? What's kind of neat then is then you can kind of throw this one out as well. And take a look at how some of these go. These are also nice to prime the pump. Sometimes it's hard to look at a blank page instead of something that's full. So, and then this is kind of just to help us remember that it is a system. They're all interconnected. And probably the important thing to take away from the interconnection of this is however your system, whatever your system is currently doing, however it behaves and whatever the output is from the system, that is what the design is. So your organization design is producing exactly what it's been designed to do. So when we say we want to be something different or we want to change or it's not doing what it should, well, that's fine. That just means that we need, it's currently balanced to do something. It's also important to realize, like, if we tried an experiment and it worked, that means that this entire organization design somehow was in balance, at least temporarily, to make that experiment a success. And I think one of the things that we do a lot is we'll try an experiment and it'll be like, we're going to say we're going to pull together a pilot team and we're going to get the executive sponsor and we're going to carve out the budget and we're going to try these new ways of working. And the experiment is so focused on things like ways of working that we didn't look at other parts of the system. We didn't look that the executive sponsor was exactly the kind of leader that we would want other leaders in the organization to be like. We ignored the fact that we carved out funding for this experiment, but it actually stabilized funding more like a product value chain instead of a project. So there were other things that we held true and the system was in balance for. And then when we try to scale what worked across the organization, we only paid attention to the opaque bits that we were paying attention to, the ways of working, the workflow, the methods, the processes, and we forget about the rest of the stuff. And so then those things aren't held true. And then we see that the organization didn't work or starts to fail. So that's kind of it. I've got a bunch of little fun things and I can share the slides, but like, why don't most of these transformations work? Basically, the red arrows are pointing to the things that, in my opinion, I see tend to get changed. And you'll notice a little pattern, like, they tend to just stay in these three circles. We never touch many obscure forces at all, especially the acting ones, which are probably some of the most powerful. You know, this is probably the most arrows in a product transformation. I'm kind of a product guy, so I might be biased, but you can kind of go through these and see like, hey, and so when we go through and ask, well, how come our organizations aren't actually transforming? Well, it's because the arrows aren't really necessarily bringing into balance the entire system. So anyways, that's kind of it. Feel free to reach out to me, email. If you go to my LinkedIn, there's not very many Barcombs, but my Calendly link is also on my LinkedIn profile if you want to chat about any of this. And I think we're at time or close to time. So happy to take any questions and hang out for, I don't have anything else going on tonight. So whatevs.
We're happy to take questions till 5:45 if there's any.
Oh yeah, awesome.
We wrap up around that.
Yeah, it was cool. The especially kind of your anecdotal red arrows.
Yeah,
Yeah, it takes, I mean, it's a lot to absorb.
it is a lot for sure. I mean, this is my like an agile. I love agile to not mean Scrum, and I know you would too, John. And I just feel like in the last couple of years, especially, agile mostly means technology department Scrum rollout. And if they've already done that, then agile means technology department safe rollout. And it's like, that's lame, but that's where we're at.
Yeah, what
Certainly
sort of
been my experience more than once.
what's do you have I mean, I guess certainly thinking about the elements that sadly are typically, the handful that might have been touched. Do you have sort of suggestions around how do you help maybe impact the obscure forces? I often think about it, that's those unseen magnetic forces under the table that the metal filings go to. And you come in there, you do some work, you try to help people, which is kind of what I try to do a lot, get better. But then you leave, and pretty soon,
yep,
those forces return.
Yep,
and they're back to like, oh wow, you look the same.
I think the two most powerful elements in this whole model are experiences and narratives up and uniting, and the organizational norms under acting. And what I mean by organizational norms isn't just some hand wavy culture. It's like, it literally means, what do people believe is true for how things get done around here? And you'll find, and actually a lot of this I stole straight up from a book called Change the Culture, Change the Game. It's the same dudes that wrote the Oz Principle, I think. So that was probably a little bit more popular. But they have this thing called the results pyramid. So what they kind of say is, like, you've got current results, and the current results come from the current actions that come from the current beliefs, and beliefs are the beliefs about what it takes to get things done around here. And your current beliefs come from your current experiences. So if we want to get new results, well, we need to get new actions. If we want new actions, we need to change beliefs. And if we want new beliefs, we have to create new experiences. And so when we start thinking about that experience design piece of, like, say, oblique leadership, this kind of weaves right back in. So if we've probably all seen that meeting where, like, the senior middle management have to go give their status update to the executive leadership, and everybody's like, they've been prepping for that meeting with those slides for like a week or two, and it's once a quarter, and it's a big dog and pony show. That's an experience, and that's a narrative. And think about like a new junior executive or new director that comes in that environment, and you're looking around, you're asking people that you trust, oh fuck, I'm supposed to present at the next quarterly pony show. What do I need to do to not look like a giant D-bag in front of my peers and boss? Oh man, well, you better make sure that you've got these great slides, and you got to have a story, and you got to have some data, like whatever those norms are, like whatever has been happening is the experience. So this, when you talk about how do we change those things, well, if you're the person who's responsible for leading the meeting, like, how would the experience be different if you're like, okay, thank you everybody, I know that you probably all prep slides, and I know that's kind of what's normal around here. We're going to take the projector out of this room. I just want everybody to talk about what's been going on in their department. No slides. Like, imagine the weird ripple. Like, people be like, oh my God, they came in and they didn't do any. So he took the projector out of the room. Like, that would change the narrative. It would definitely create a different story. I don't know. So that's maybe a contrived example, but I think we can actually do a bit of a quote unquote cultural analysis by asking people, what do they think the norms are? Where do they think those norms come from? And what experiences, and I don't like that culture gets so often hand waved, because if you actually go and talk to an anthropologist, it's like, how would you study culture? Or if you excavated a site and you said this culture was X, or these people had a culture of X, you'd ask them, well, how would you know? And they'd say things like, well, we found these artifacts and we found these paintings and we saw things that inferred that they did these rituals. So like we can actually take the same thing from anthropology and kind of port it to organizational design, be like, well, what are our important artifacts and who are our important people and what are the important rituals that we partake in? Like you kind of go through, there's only like 5 or 6 things that anthropologists really say really shape or define like what a culture is. So we can go look at those things in our culture at our org and be like, well, great, those are the pivot points. How would we want those to change? Like, how should we change the rituals? How should we change the artifacts? Who are our important people and how could we, change who they are or change how they act or interact, right? So those would be things that I would look at.
So maybe like build a pyramid.
Yeah. Sacrifice, human sacrifice. I mean, those are things we've been doing, I think,
I will say I use a phrase like experiencing agile because you can't teach it. You can't read about it in a book, just like, I guess you could read a book on playing tennis, but no, you gotta be in there. And like I say, I don't train and I don't coach because, coaches on the sideline, what the hell do they know? Like, no, you gotta be more like a quarterback, like at least American football quarterback, you're getting punched in the face and grass stains and, but you're there, you're experiencing the game. And, and plus that's what you have to, I don't want to say fix, but that's what you're dealing with. That's your context. That's your environment. And so, yeah, the experiencing part definitely.
And going way back to this model, right? Like, I think that's kind of, what does it mean to alter experiences, right? So like alter key inflection points to reshape beliefs and norms, create new behaviors and narratives with targeted action. So how do you show up and what do you do? If you're a leader, if you've got positional authority, what are your interactions with other people? How are you probably making other people feel? Like, how are you going to be that quarterback? And I think another one that's really important is this democratized decision making. So sure, there's like probabilistic this and likelihoods that. So there's definitely some mechanical things about decision making. That's more what this take action and uncertainty is about. But how do we as leaders or people with positional authority, how do we actually divest that authority in a way that makes sense? How do we actually create true accountability in a way that doesn't mean blame? How do we ask people to be responsible, but balance that responsibility with agency? And those, I think, are very important when we think about how to delegate or how to democratize decision making. So I think those are 2 pretty big pieces of things that never really change when we do any of these transformations. And so, yeah, we mirror some methods, and even if the methods and practices go well, because some of those other power structures never change, and I don't mean power like authority, like that is also true, but because we've never changed some of these cultural norms, as soon as the consultants go away or the budget runs out or the experiment is over, all those things that we like to kind of call the organizational antibodies, all that, it feels like it just kind of comes flooding and rushing back in. And at best, we plateaued and we stay at the plateau. But I mean, honestly, y'all have seen it probably more often than not. We crash back down. We never actually get to that higher point on the other side of the Satir change curve. We kind of go down into chaos, and if we're lucky, we come back up to where we were before. Sometimes it feels like we just hang out in chaos.
Yeah. I don't want to monopolize, but the take action uncertainty, I often talk about that with teams. Like I certainly promote at every level having a vision, expected outcome, some sort of direction that we're at least hopefully all, if we communicate enough, over communicate, where we're headed. Especially the more systems that you're in are super complex, unknown, and just weird, and you have to fight and resist the urge to think that you can sort of break it down, turn it into these little units. I mean, that's what everybody wants to do, and ignore the fuzziness. But I think there's power in the fuzziness. That's where creativity, innovation can come from. And I often say that, and my colleague John Turley, that I work with the most, we even talk about not just psychological safety, but the physical embodied felt sense, like, because you know it, you feel it if your heart rate goes, or you can tell that something might not feel right. And so in the face of uncertainty, take a step. I mean, don't take a step over a cliff, but take a small step, and then you'll sense, even if you're not sure, do we need to go here or there? You might not even be able to put a rational experiment other than let's just try to go over here and see if that's like the old getting warmer, getting colder, like the old kid.
Sometimes it is just trying, like, does it feel good this way? There's a book, it's actually written by the same guy who wrote Obliquity, called Radical Uncertainty. And he's trying to help us remember in that book that yes, like data is awesome and we're able to do more and cooler things with data and evidence. However, there's just things that you can't know. And sometimes it's complicated. Like, what happens if like the World Trade Organization changes financial? Like, we don't know. No one knows. One of the things that he kind of talks about was he talks about like the Obama decision to like go after bin Laden, the bunker, and that during that conversation, people were saying things like, well, there's a 50% chance that he's there, or there's an 80% chance that he's there. And he does a pretty funny job reminding us that what that would mean is that over the long run, every time we've invaded a bunker where bin Laden might be, half the time he's there. That's what a 50% chance of him being there means statistically. And of course, that's ridiculous because we don't do it over the long run and there's not multiple occurrences. So we tend to use these numbers to basically make us feel better about our subjective. Now, they might still be very informed, but somebody coming and saying there's a 20% chance that he's there is just you saying, I don't think it's very likely because how I've interpreted the information we have. And so I think that's important to kind of embrace. And he's kind of helping us in that book again, trying to help us remember that there are narrative ways of sensing, there are behavioral ways of sensing and interpreting information, and one's not better than the other. Like, we should use both. Like, we've got data, awesome, use it, but let's not get rid of our intuition and instinct as well. Let's bring them both to bear.
Yeah, a lot of the problem is from very young age in our K through 12. There's a lot of education about absolutes, and we fall. It's so easy. We often talk about it. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking about a unit-wise approach, and and
we want it.
Yeah, that the numbers, like 20% is real. No, it's something, but it's not.
Yeah, it's a signal, but it's not a real number. It's like a story point. Sorry, too soon? Too soon.
Nice. Yeah.
That's what we're here for, Matt.
That's what I do.
Yeah, I don't do estimates unless I have to. I rarely. Three. Yeah. Good one though, Matt. Yeah.
So I think I put everybody else to sleep. So
I think everyone's thinking about all the information that you shared.
It's a lot.
Woo. Better go get dinner rolling before my wife gets home.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for having me. I enjoyed giving this again. So fun times.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
All right. Talk to you all soon. Feel free to reach out if you need it.
Awesome. Take care, everybody.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.